Imagine owning a multi-million-dollar mansion. But when you pull up to your own gate, strangers from the HOA step in front of you and say, "You don't belong here." Now picture this. Within minutes, the quiet street turns into a battlefield of pride and power. Because this man wasn't alone. What happened next shocked the entire neighborhood and left the HOA wishing they had never picked this fight. They say the measure of a man is not in what he owns, but in how he stands when everything he's earned is questioned. For Gregory Holt, life had been a long road of discipline, sacrifice, and quiet perseverance. He wasn't born into wealth. Every brick of his success was laid through years of service, sweat, and sleepless nights. He had fought for his country, endured battles that most civilians couldn't even imagine, and had returned home carrying scars, some visible, some buried deep. When he finally purchased his dream mansion in an exclusive gated community, it wasn't just a house. It was the symbol of everything he had worked for. A place where his family could finally feel secure, a sanctuary where the nightmares of war could fade into peace. The sprawling lawn, the towering oaks, the iron gates, they were more than luxury. They were freedom. But on one quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped across the rooftops of that pristine neighborhood, Gregory faced a moment that stripped all the peace from his chest. Standing before his own gate, key code in hand, he found himself denied entry, once, twice. The cold screen blinked. Access denied. He frowned, confused. This was his property. He had the deed. He had the passcode. How could he be locked out of his own home? And then she appeared, Sandra Whitfield, the head of the Homeowners Association, a woman whose reputation was whispered in every corner of the community. She thrived on authority, and the small taste of power the HOA had given her had become her entire identity. "Sir," she called out, her voice sharp as broken glass. "This entrance is for residents only." Gregory blinked, stunned. "I am a resident," he said evenly, pointing past the gate. "That's my home. My name is on the deed." But Sandra's lips curled into a dismissive smirk. "Not according to our records. Until you prove otherwise, you're trespassing. And we can't allow trespassers inside." It wasn't just her words, it was her tone. That smug arrogance, the way she didn't even acknowledge his name. To her, Gregory wasn't a decorated veteran, wasn't a homeowner, wasn't even a man of dignity. In her eyes, he was simply someone she could push aside to feed her sense of control. Neighbors began to notice. Curtains shifted. Cars slowed as drivers lingered, sensing tension. A few even pulled out their phones, quietly recording. Gregory's jaw clenched. His instincts told him to demand justice, to call out the insult for what it was. But decades of discipline had taught him patience. He steadied his breathing. This wasn't the battlefield. He didn't need weapons or anger. He needed resolve. Without another word, Gregory pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a number he hadn't used in a while, pressed dial, and when the line clicked open, he spoke 3 words with quiet finality. "It's happening now." The HOA president didn't know it yet, but she had just started a fight she couldn't win. Because Gregory Holt had never stood alone, and today would be no exception. When Gregory ended the call, the hush on the street felt like a held breath. Sandra Whitfield's satisfied smirk hardened into a look of triumph. She had the gate, the clipboard, the rules. To her, this was a simple reminder of who kept order in the neighborhood. Gregory, however, had something she could never summon with a stamp on paper. Loyalty forged in danger. He had brothers who had stood with him through missions where failure meant lives ended. When he tapped a number on his phone, he wasn't summoning hired help. He was calling the men who had his back, no matter the cost. Minutes later, the quiet was broken by a measured rumble. Dark SUVs rolled down the cul-de-sac, not rushing, but arriving with an exactness that spoke of discipline. Doors opened. Men stepped out with a bearing that needs no uniform to prove who they were. Shoulders squared, faces calm. They moved with the same rigid coordination Gregory had known in far more hostile places. Neighbors peered from windows, phones up, mouths slightly open. Curtains twitched. Lawn chairs stilled. The sight of those men changed the scene from an HOA spat to something larger. A demonstration that human dignity matters more than petty control. People felt it. Some nodded silently. Others whispered, uneasy at the show of force, yet unable to deny the moral clarity of the moment. Sandra's composure flickered. For the first time, the clipboard felt flimsy. The authority she'd wielded with small cruelties was meeting an unspoken force that didn't need to shout. Brett and Neil, her enforcers, tightened their grips on their clipboards. The confident faces they'd worn earlier were starting to pale. Gregory stepped forward, his boots soft on asphalt, his voice steady. "This is my home," he said simply. "I will walk through that gate." Behind him, his friends did not brandish weapons or raise voices. They stood like a line of trees in a gale, rooted, quiet, immovable. Their presence wasn't intimidation. It was solidarity. It was a statement. He belonged. Sandra tried to drag the moment back into rulebooks. "You can't bring outsiders to intimidate our community," she cried, clinging to procedure as if it were a shield. But the argument rang hollow now. A neighbor shifted forward on a porch, then another. Phones lowered, conversations rose, soft but clear. "He showed his deed," someone said. "He has the gate remote." The spectacle Sandra had hoped to control reflected back on her. Gregory met her gaze without anger. "They're my brothers," he said. "They stood with me when it mattered. Today they stand with me because I asked." Respect is not optional. The weight of the street leaned toward him. Sandra's shoulders sagged, then squared with defiance. She was not finished. Neither was he. But the balance had changed. The scene that had started as a simple dispute had become a test of who this neighborhood would choose to be. As Gregory prepared to produce proof and move through his gate, the stage was set. The fight would leave the sidewalk and head into meeting rooms and message threads. There would be votes, bylaws, and angry conversations. This was no quiet resolution. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and the entire community was now awake, watching who would protect the right to belong. That night, Sandra Whitfield didn't sleep. The image of Gregory's brothers standing silently at the gate gnawed at her pride. She had ruled the HOA for years, bending rules when it suited her, intimidating homeowners with fines, letters, and threats. Never once had anyone dared to challenge her authority so directly, until now. By sunrise, Sandra had made her move. Flyers went up. Emails shot through inboxes. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for that very evening. The subject line carried a tone of alarm: community safety and unauthorized intimidation tactics. The message was clear. Sandra would not back down. By 7 o'clock, the community center buzzed with tension. Neighbors shuffled into metal chairs, whispering in hushed voices. Some came with arms folded, ready to defend Sandra. Others came with quiet curiosity, wanting to hear Gregory's side. And then there were those who just wanted peace. But even they knew peace would never come without this confrontation. Sandra sat at the front like a judge about to pass sentence, flanked by Brett and Neil. The clipboard was in her lap again, her weapon of choice. She cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice sharp. "Last night, this community was invaded by armed men brought in by one of our residents. We cannot and will not allow intimidation tactics to undermine the safety of our neighborhood." Murmurs rippled across the room. Phones recorded. Heads turned. Gregory rose slowly from his chair. He hadn't come with an army tonight. Just himself. Just his presence. He didn't need theatrics. Truth was powerful enough. "I brought no army," he said calmly. "I called my brothers. They came because I was denied entry into my own home. They came because loyalty still means something." Not one of them raised a hand. Not one of them threatened anyone. But somehow that's called intimidation? The room grew quiet. Even Sandra hesitated at his tone. There was no anger in his words, only a steady conviction that cut deeper than shouting ever could. A hand rose in the back. It was Mrs. Alvarez, one of the older residents, known for her fairness. "Sandra, I saw the video." Those men stood quietly. They didn't break rules. They didn't cause harm. The only thing they did was stand beside their friend. Isn't that what a community is supposed to look like? Others nodded. The murmurs shifted tone. Some muttered agreement. Others crossed their arms tighter. Sandra's cheeks flushed. "This isn't about friendship," she snapped. "This is about following the rules. Without rules, there is chaos. Without order, there is no safety. Gregory met her glare, unshaken. Rules without respect are cages, and cages don't make people safe. They make people small. That line struck the room like a bell. Even those who disagreed with Gregory couldn't deny the weight of his words. The meeting stretched on, voices rising and falling, neighbors taking sides. The battle lines had been drawn, not with weapons, but with trust, loyalty, and the question of who truly belonged. As the meeting adjourned, Sandra's face was tight with fury. She had lost ground tonight, and she knew it. Gregory, on the other hand, walked out not with victory but with resolve, because this wasn't just a fight about a gate anymore. It was about showing a community what real strength looks like. Sandra Whitfield was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat. The morning after the heated HOA meeting, she sat at her kitchen table, stacks of documents spread before her like weapons. Her hands trembled not from fear but from indignation. Gregory had embarrassed her in front of the entire community. He had made her look weak, and Sandra would not allow that image to last. She drafted letters, violation notices, threats of fines that grew heavier with every page, unauthorized gatherings, improper use of property, failure to comply with HOA security measures. She filled in line after line, convinced that if she could bury Gregory in enough paperwork, she could force him to bend by afternoon. A thick envelope was taped to Gregory's gate. Gregory found it as he returned from a jog, sweat on his brow, earbuds still in his ears. He tore it open, scanning the words. A slow smile touched his lips, not because it amused him, but because he recognized the tactic. Pressure, intimidation, bureaucracy used as a weapon. He had seen it before, only on far deadlier battlefields. Years ago, in a desert half a world away, Gregory's unit had faced an enemy that tried to break them with endless noise, confusion, and false reports, but his commander's words still rang in his mind. A flood looks powerful, but if you stand firm, the water always passes. He folded the letter carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, and placed it on the ledge of the gate. Not with anger, not with fear, just quiet defiance. Sandra, watching from a window across the street, clenched her fists. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't rattled. She wanted him flustered, desperate, pleading. Instead, he looked calmer than ever, as if each attempt only strengthened him. That evening, neighbors gathered again, not in a meeting, but in hushed conversations at mailboxes and driveways. They spoke about the fines, about the letters, about Gregory's silence. Many admitted they'd once feared Sandra's notices, paying fines they didn't deserve just to keep peace. But now, seeing Gregory stand tall, something inside them shifted. Maybe. "We don't have to keep paying," one man muttered. "She can't bully." "Everyone forever," another whispered. The cracks in Sandra's empire were beginning to show. Later that night, Gregory sat on his back porch, the hum of crickets filling the air. One of his special ops brothers, Marcus, joined him. "She won't quit," Marcus said softly. "You know that, right?" Gregory nodded. "I know, but neither will I. This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone she's kept under her thumb. Someone has to show them that fear ends the moment you refuse to bow." Marcus smiled faintly. Spoken like a commander, Gregory shook his head. Spoken like a neighbor who just wants peace. But deep down, he knew this battle wasn't near its end. Sandra would find new ways to strike, and he would have to stand taller each time. Because strength wasn't just about winning fights, it was about showing others that they could stand too. Sandra Whitfield wasn't finished. The fines hadn't worked, the meeting hadn't silenced him, and the whispers in the neighborhood made her chest tighten with anger. She could feel control slipping from her fingers, and so she reached for the one weapon she thought would end everything once and for all: outside authority. By midweek, official-looking vehicles lined Gregory Street. A police cruiser idled near the gate. A man in a tailored suit carried a briefcase, his tie snapping in the wind. Sandra marched at their side, chin high, clipboard clutched tight like a queen's scepter. Neighbors gathered on lawns and porches, phones already recording. The tension was palpable. They knew Sandra had escalated again, and this time it looked serious. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson," he said in a crisp, practiced tone, "you are in violation of multiple HOA ordinances. We are here to inform you of pending legal action should you continue to disrupt community safety. The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the eyes filming him. Gregory didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his posture calm, his voice even. "Officer," he said, addressing the policeman directly, "am I under arrest? Am I trespassing? Is there a crime being committed?" The officer hesitated. "No, sir. This is a civil matter," Gregory nodded. "Then with respect, this doesn't involve you." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. Sandra's cheeks flushed red, her jaw tight. The lawyer pressed on, waving his papers. "Regardless, Mr. Johnson, you are obligated to comply with HOA directives. If you refuse, we will pursue legal remedies to enforce compliance." Gregory looked around at the gathered neighbors, then back at the lawyer. His tone never rose, but his words carried the weight of iron. "I've faced people with far more power than a clipboard or a lawsuit. I didn't bow then, and I won't bow now. This is my home. I've earned it, not just with money, but with years of service, sacrifice, and loyalty to a country that promised me freedom. And I'll be damned if I let anyone tell me I don't belong." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the cruiser's engine. Then, slowly, applause started. First from Mrs. Alvarez, then from another neighbor, and then more, until the entire street was clapping, their voices rising above the legal jargon Sandra had tried to weaponize. Someone called out, "We know who you are, Gregory. Thank you for your service." The word spread quickly. People who had only seen him as the quiet man with the big house now began to understand the story behind his calm. He wasn't just a wealthy homeowner. He was a soldier who had carried burdens most of them could never imagine. The lawyer shifted awkwardly. The officer gave a respectful nod before stepping back. Sandra, fuming, could only stand frozen, watching her power unravel in real time. Gregory didn't bask in the applause. He only bowed his head slightly and said, "I'm just your neighbor, and I want to be treated like one." At that moment, the tide had turned. The battle wasn't over, but the neighborhood was no longer blind. Sandra Whitfield's empire was crumbling, and she knew it. The fines hadn't worked. The meeting had backfired. Even the lawyer and the police had left her standing alone in the middle of the street, while neighbors applauded Gregory. But instead of stepping back, Sandra doubled down. Desperation can make even the strongest-looking leaders unravel. The very next morning, she called an official emergency vote of the HOA board. She pushed a motion to revoke Gregory's residency. Altogether, an outrageous attempt to strip a man of his home simply because he wouldn't bend to her authority. The board gathered in the community center once again, the air thick with tension. But this time, things were different. The crowd wasn't just curious, they were invested. Neighbors who once stayed silent were now speaking openly, their voices strong, their phones still rolling. Sandra stood at the front, her tone sharp, her face pale with fury. "If we allow this man to intimidate us, if we allow him to flaunt rules, then what kind of community are we?" Gregory rose quietly from his seat. He didn't slam his fist. He didn't raise his voice. He simply pulled from his jacket a small, worn photo, his unit, smiling in dusty uniforms, their arms around each other. Some of those men never made it home. His voice softened, yet carried through the entire hall. "You ask what kind of community we are?" he said. "I'll tell you. A community isn't built on clipboards or threats. It's built on respect, on loyalty, on neighbors who lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. My brothers in this photo stood with me in places where life itself wasn't guaranteed. And now, in a place meant to be called home, I'm asking for nothing more than the same respect we all deserve." The room fell silent. Even Sandra's closest allies shifted uneasily. Mrs. Alvarez spoke up again, her voice steady. "We've all felt bullied by these rules. Gregory just had the courage to stand when the rest of us stayed quiet. And I, for one, believe this community is better than fear." Applause swelled, louder than before. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even with tears in their eyes. The vote was called, and one by one, the board members lowered their heads. Sandra's motion failed. Not just failed, it was crushed, unanimously rejected. Sandra, trembling, gathered her clipboard and stormed out, her heels clicking on the tile. For the first time, the neighborhood saw her not as a leader, but as a woman who had mistaken control for respect. Gregory remained standing, but his eyes weren't on Sandra. They were his neighbors, the people who, at last, had found their voice. He smiled faintly, almost shyly. "This isn't about winning," he said quietly. "It's about reminding each other that home should never be a place of fear. It should be the one place we all belong." And in that moment, the community understood. Gregory didn't just win his right to walk through his gate. He gave the entire neighborhood the courage to walk through theirs. If Gregory's story touched your heart and reminded you that respect is worth fighting for, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard.